Chapter 1. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Have her go to jail for you. Translator. Nyo iwo Studio Editor. Nyo iwo Studio. Standing inside the elevator, Yun-shi looked at her reflection in the mirror and gingerly pulled away the scarf wrapped around her face. Her burning, scorched face was still seeping blood, while her biological mother, Liang Shuqin's, harsh voice echoed in her ears. I asked you to give up your marriage for your second sister, and you caused her to have a heart attack, instead. How could I have ever given birth to a cursed child like you? No wonder the fortune teller said you would bring bad luck to your entire family. Not only did you kill my unborn son, but you also caused your dad to be unable to get a promotion or make a fortune, even until now. By destroying your face, this marriage will now belong to your second sister. She's the only one who deserves to marry into the Jiang family. Mom, no. Ah. My face. Inside the elevator, Yun-shi stared blankly at her horrific face, and her eyes were gloomy. The moment the sulfuric acid was splashed onto her face, the intense burning had destroyed the last bit of affection remaining between her and Liang Shuqin. This marriage was absurd, to begin with. Grandfather Yun had taken a bullet for Grandfather Jiang many years ago. In order to repay the debt, the two grandfathers decided on this arranged marriage even before Yun-shi was even born. But afterward, she only had her bright moonlight in her heart and thus disregarded this marriage arrangement. She had only delayed canceling this marriage for so long because her so-called fiancé still needed her to protect him and make it easy for him to fool around with other women and enjoy worldly pleasures. As for Yun-shi, she used her status of fiancé of the Jiang family to smoothly navigate the world of business. She supported the bright moonlight in her heart the entire way to confidently claim the prized position of the CEO of the Han Corporation. But now her face was ruined, so the rest of her life was probably ruined too. The elevator chimed as it stopped on the 56th floor. She jerked her mind back to reality and tightened the scarf around her face before exiting the elevator. On her way there, she was already thinking that she would exert all efforts to repair her face as long as Han Yaotian didn't shun her. It was already lunchtime, so there were barely any other people on the entire office floor. Yun-shi squeezed the bento box in her hand as she reached out to knock on the door. As soon as she touched the door handle, the low-speaking voices of a man and woman suddenly sounded from inside the office. The quiet creaking noises didn't sound right at all. Yun-shi's hand suddenly froze mid-knock. Yun-shi's greedy mother is fairly easy to manipulate after all. I had just randomly provoked her with a few words, and she actually threw sulfuric acid on her own daughter. She's disfigured now, so you only need to tell her a few nice things to trick her. As for the South District construction project, have her go to jail for you. I wanted her to take the blame for the South District construction project for a long time now. But I still need to get the Mr. Virus formula from her first, since Huiqing Pharmaceuticals actually offered 300 million yuan to buy it from me. This huge sum of money would be enough to fill in the deficit from the Gulf project. There was a mix of pain and pleasure in the woman's voice, along with hints of smugness. How do you plan on rewarding me for sending Yun-shi, the idiot, to jail? The man laughed lewdly, his deep voice tinged with concealment. Little fairy, what's the hurry? Once we get the formula from that B*TCH, I'll be able to satisfy you with anything you want. With a loud bang, the ajar office door was pushed open. Yun-shi stood at the doorway, her tearful eyes glaring fiercely at the man and woman pressed against the French windows. One was the bright moonlight she exerted all efforts to support, and the other was her best friend. Beware of fire, thieves, and best friends, this saying was truly right after all. She didn't expect to end up in such a situation, all thanks to the plotting by the hands of her best friend and the man she loved. Han Yaotian suddenly let go when he saw her. A hint of anxiety flashed across his smug face. Yun-shi. You have to let me explain. What else do you need to explain? You already know. She must have heard everything, from the look on her face. Yun Shi, hand over the Mr. Virus formula if you know what's good for you. With your hideous appearance, you probably shouldn't come out and scare people again. I'll help you take care of Yao Tian from now on. Leaning against the window, Qiao Shimin smiled coyly as she wiggled her waist and pressed against Han Yaotian's body. She looked at Yun Shi smugly as a lethal glint appeared in her sharp eyes. The atmosphere suddenly stiffened, and Yun Shi tightened her grip on the bento box before lifting her leaden legs to walk toward the two people. In order to help Han Yaotian claim the CEO position of the Han Corporation, she gave up on her career as a doctor and joined the laboratory. In order to make up for the corporation's deficit, she even used her own body to experiment and test drug reactions. She nearly perished on the operating table. She never expected that she was merely a chess piece that he could play to suit whatever needs were desired. Snorting derisively, she began to laugh freely and with despair. Qiao Shimin, even if I die, don't you even dream of getting anything from me. I don't have a problem dragging you two to hell, or dragging the Han Corporation along either. With a flourish of her hand, she threw the bento box down hard against Qiao Shimin's head. Ripping off the scarf on her face, she directly lunged over and began to fight with her. Qiao Shimin was so terrified, she screamed shrilly at the first glance of Yun Shi's horrific face. In one moment, Qiao Shimin grabbed Yun Shi by the hair and pressed her face against the glass window before viciously slamming her on it. Her face was ruined. The man she loved was stolen away. She had no future career prospects. Everything was ruined by the hands of this woman here. How could she have been so blind and not seen Qiao Shimin's true face in all these years? But it was already too late now. Even if she had to go to jail, she wouldn't let this be *tch off. The two women fought each other all the way to the balcony, and Yun Shi squeezed Qiao Shimin's neck with all her might. She was furious and insane. Her back faced the man, so she didn't feel any danger directly approaching her. Her legs were suddenly in the air as Han Yaotian grabbed them to find an opportunity to shove her outwards. Before she knew it, she had already been pushed off the railing. The world spun, gravity pulling her down. On the balcony, Han Yaotian and Qiao Shimin laughed maniacally as they watched her quickly fall to the ground like a bird with broken wings. It was snowing. The first snow in the Jingdu brushed past her bloodied face as she closed her eyes unwillingly. Chapter 2 You are listening at novelfull.audio. Rebirth into a battle against wolves. Translator. Nyo I.bo Studio Editor. Nyo I.bo Studio. The wind whistled in Yun Shi's ears as she opened her eyes to see the dazzling sunlight filtering through the treetops. She struggled to sit up, and the dull pain on her body made her feel like she had hurt her tendons and bones. She scanned the surroundings and discovered that this wasn't a hospital or the business district, but rather a dense forest. There was a faint moist smell in the air. She remembered that she had been pushed off the building by Hao Yaotian, so how did she end up in a place like this? She looked down to see that the skin on her arms had been cut by the tree branches and the clothes, that were several sizes too big, were hanging loosely on her body. Her jeans had been washed until they turned white and were also very old-fashioned, the hems were already worn down. These pants. Why did she keep thinking they looked somewhat familiar, like the first pair of jeans she had worn when she was 16 years old? That was the first time in her life she had worn new clothing, so the memory was vivid. With trembling hands, she touched her face. Her smooth and soft skin wasn't corroded and burnt from sulfuric acid, nor did she feel any pain. She hadn't died. She was still alive. She had been reborn into the year she was 16. When she realized this, Yun Shi suddenly recalled how this was the year her grandfather had sent someone to her uncle's home in the countryside to bring her back home to Jingdu. That was when her greedy aunt had begun to have evil ideas in her head. In order to allow her older cousin, Liang Sini, to replace Yun Shi and go to Jingdu instead, mother and daughter conspired to push her down the mountain after they tricked her uncle into leaving. She was fortunate enough to have survived and returned home with a muddy face. Her uncle had been the one to stand up for her, personally escorting her back to the Yun family and bringing her cousin, the false replacement, back home. At this time, her auntie must have been frantically trying to send her cousin to the city. She must hurry back, no matter what. She had lived too cowardly in her last life. Since the heavens had given her another chance to live her life, she must live properly this time around. She would send every single person who had conspired and harmed her in the last life straight to hell. She glanced around and saw the forest swaying in the breeze around her. The wind was blowing to the front and right of her, so she should be able to walk out of the forest by following the wind's direction. She suddenly remembered how she had used her identity of fiancée of the Jiang family all those years ago and cheated her way into training with the Flying Wolf Squad for a few months. She didn't have high hopes that she had a very strong physique with her tiny, 16-year-old body. However, she hadn't forgotten anything about wilderness survival skills. As the wind whistled, there was suddenly the addition of wolf howls. Her subconscious alertness made her tense up. As soon as she turned around, she instantly saw a dozen black and gray wolves approaching her from all directions. The golden wolf eyes stared intently at her, and she subconsciously stepped back. It began to howl. The wolf howls instantly snapped her mind back to focus, and her heels began to shake. Before her eyes were definitely not huskies, but actual wolves. It wasn't only one wolf, but an entire pack of wolves. She exhaled sharply and instinctively bolted the way the wind was blowing. Suddenly, the light gray wolf in the middle lunged toward her. She flipped over and tumbled in the opposite direction. Her 16-year-old body wasn't agile enough, so her movements were much slower as well. As soon as the light gray wolf made its move, the other wolves in the pack quickly moved toward her in attack. The surveillance camera hidden in the branches flashed several times, and the scene was recorded into the surveillance room on the other end. The alarms in the surveillance room began to sound. The bodyguards' eyes instantly widened as they watched the young girl battle against the wolf pack on screen. They grabbed their radios to shout, "Someone broke into the forest. Hurry up and ask the boss to come here." Soon afterward, several men wearing dark green camo outfits walked in with authority. They stood in 2 rows as per their extensive training. A man with a proud figure walked in from the doorway, with a fierce but lazy snow leopard following behind him. His strapping figure evoked a sense of oppression. His dark green, casual outfit cloaked his stalwart figure, and a pair of sunglasses sat atop of his finely chiseled and handsome face. His invisible imperial aura instantly emanated and prevented anyone from directly looking at him. The group of bodyguards stood with backs ramrod straight. Boss. His arrival had instantly made the expansive surveillance room feel a bit crowded. Behind the sunglasses, Mu Feiqi's sharp and deep-set eyes were steeped with arrogance. His gaze fell on the figure currently battling the wolf pack on the surveillance monitors. The movements were swift and vicious. But upon closer inspection, it was actually a young girl. Chapter 3. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Master Mu actually picked her up. Translator. Nyo.bo Studio Editor. Nyo.bo Studio. The young girl in the surveillance video was completely unarmed but managed to use a broken branch to hurt a few of the wolves. The wild nature of the fierce beasts had been provoked, so the young girl would soon end up as the wolf pack's dinner. Mu Feiqi raised a brow slightly and coldly remarked, "Prepare a helicopter." "Yes, boss." Inside the helicopter, Mu Feiqi had just sat down when the snow leopard also quickly jumped inside. Inside the primary forest, She was being crushed into the ground by a wolf. Its fierce claws quickly swiped at the top of her head. The heavy strength suppressed her, but she managed to flip over with great difficulty. Her hands firmly held the wolf's claws back as she bent her legs to viciously kick it on the stomach. The gray wolf, half a human's height, was instantly kicked off to the side by her. She instantly sat up and vigilantly watched the wolf pack surrounding her. She ran into a wolf pack as soon as she was reborn, but she didn't recall herself being this unlucky in her previous life. As she faced off against the eager eyes of the wolf pack, she suddenly felt her scalp go numb. At that moment, the sound of a helicopter appeared above her head. When the wolf pack heard the noise, they instantly stopped in their tracks and looked up at the source of the sound. Seizing the opportunity, Yunshi didn't even hesitate before bolting toward the other direction. A rush of footsteps sounded behind her, but she didn't dare to turn back at all. The noise became even more frantic, so she couldn't help but turn around to take a glance. There was no wolf pack behind her, but there was only a large cat chasing after her. Upon closer inspection, that wasn't right. Oh, my God! This was no cat, this was a snow leopard. The snow leopard climbed up a tree in a few swift motions and used the branches to quickly leap in front of her. It slammed to a sudden stop and directly blocked her path of escape. Yunshi's legs turned into jelly as she directly fell to the ground. What kind of hellish place was this? There were wolf packs and snow leopards, this was a zoo of wild animals. Earlier, she seemed to have heard the sound of helicopters. That meant other people were coming. She quickly turned around, and a dark green figure walked toward her with his back facing the light. She couldn't clearly discern his face but could feel a powerful aura surging toward her from all directions. This was a powerful aura belonging to a high-ranking person. Before she could even make out who was coming, the snow leopard blocking her path ahead suddenly lunged toward her. Unprepared, she was knocked to the ground. As soon as she looked up, she saw the now very close snow leopard making a fierce expression at her. She couldn't catch her breath, so her eyes locked straight ahead before she immediately passed out in fear. The snow leopard looked at the little girl it had frightened into passing out and purposely used its snout to nudge her chin. When it noticed the girl truly wasn't giving any reaction, it looked up at its owner and put on a cute face of innocence. It really hadn't intended to frighten the girl into passing out. Who knew this little girl would be so easily spooked? Mufeichi petted the snow leopard's head and looked down at the battered and bruised young girl on the ground. He had never expected this delicate, little body to be hiding such great strength. The earlier surveillance footage of her battling the wolf pack was imprinted in his mind. Her rapid, accurate, and vicious capture and attack methods were no less impressive than the soldiers he forged with ruthless training. If she wasn't a girl, she would be a pretty good trainee. Feng Rui bent down to assess the passed-out Yunshi. From the surveillance footage, it was indeed remarkable for her to have such explosive power at a young age. Unfortunately, she was a young girl. Leaning down, he was about to pick her up from the ground, but Mufeichi was already a step ahead. Feng Rui looked up in shock and widened his eyes like he was seeing a ghost. His expression was in complete disbelief. Ever since Master Mu's mother passed away, he hadn't allowed any female creatures to approach within 1 meter. He actually picked up this young girl with his own hands. Was it because the girl was so young that Mufeichi was automatically disregarding her gender? Chapter 4 You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Do you want to die? Translator. Nyo.bo Studio Editor. Nyo.bo Studio. When Yunshi regained consciousness, she was surrounded in complete darkness. Sitting up abruptly, she looked around with vigilance. She noticed there were no other people or wild animals, so she finally sighed in quiet relief. Flipping on the main light switch, the entire room was illuminated. This was a very masculine and Spartan-style room. It was finished with dark green carpet, a large, wooden bed with gray-green bed sheets, an office desk across from the bed, and all sorts of data drawings hung on the walls. The room was very spacious with 2 starkly contrasting decorating styles. One side was for office use, and the other was for relaxation, yet they didn't interfere with each other to create 2 individual spaces. Without any particular trigger, she suddenly recalled the man who had gotten off the helicopter. Although she hadn't seen his face clearly, that imposing aura had probably belonged to a tall and strongly built man. Turning her head, she looked down at the men's T-shirt she was wearing as a dress. The scratches on her arms, shoulders, and legs were wrapped in a thin layer of gauze, so she looked a bit like a mummy. It was a bit ridiculous. She opened the door to go downstairs. As soon as she walked to the top of the staircase, she heard the crack of glass breaking from downstairs. "Get out!" A man's deep and harsh voice disrupted the peaceful quiet inside the living room. Yun-shi stood at the top of the staircase as she watched the figures of a man and a woman in the living room. The man was facing the French windows. He was dressed in a casual outfit, and his long legs and slender figure above his boots made up his proud figure. Even though his back faced Yun-shi, she could already feel the powerful aura he was emitting at that moment. "Master Mu, I'm begging you not to kick me out. No cars are leaving here this late at night. I'm just a girl and I'm afraid." Han Wanling had just reached out to touch his muscular and powerful arms when Mu Feiqi rapidly brushed her way. His masculine strength directly threw Han Wanling onto the floorboards. Ah! Han Wanling didn't expect to fall on the ground, so her hands directly pressed down on the glass shards on the floorboards. It hurt so much that she began to whine. Mu Feiqi turned around, raising his brows in disgust. His slender fingers removed the casual jacket that Wanling had touched before directly throwing it down her head. Suddenly, a rush of heat rose up his body. He looked down at the distraught woman fallen to the ground. Yet she hadn't forgotten to twist her waist and cross her legs in an attempt to feign aggrievedness. Mu Feiqi's inky eyes surged with unpredictable darkness. With just one glance, Han Wanling felt as if she had been cut by a sharp blade. All of a sudden, it was like an invisible hand had clasped around her throat. She could only feel suffocation, so how could she remember to take the opportunity to seduce him? Yun-shi was finally able to understand what was going on. She turned around and was about to leave when her quiet movements alerted the keen man inside the living room. "Stand right there." Yun-shi froze and rigidly moved back the leg she had just placed on the staircase. "Come downstairs." Yun-shi turned around and obediently walked down under Mu Feiqi's terrifying gaze. Han Wanling didn't expect there to be other people in the house, so she turned around to assess her. Bedodem, this wretched girl had popped out of nowhere and was actually wearing Master Mu's clothes. From the looks of her body, she was just a barely pubescent, young girl. She had no desirable figure or face, but could Master Mu actually be into this type? No. That was impossible. There were so many men who bowed down to her hem, so she had ample confidence in her allure. Yun-shi looked up slightly as she stood before this man with such a powerful aura. Even though she had interrupted their business, she didn't appear even slightly harried or embarrassed at all. Mu Feiqi's sharp and icy gaze fixed tightly on her, but he somehow lost control because of her tender and exquisite face. He finally noticed that something wasn't right. He instantly turned around to look at the broken cups on the ground, his dark and somber eyes shining with chilliness. "You spiked my drink. Do you want to die?" Mu Feiqi's handsome face was enraged. He ripped the tablecloth off the coffee table to throw all the teacups and tea platter onto Han Wanling. Han Wanling wasn't able to dodge in time, so her eyes saw stars from the collision. Master Mu, I don't know what you're talking about." She instantly felt the embarrassment being seen right through by his glaring look. She kept her head down to avoid his frightening eyes. Yun-shi finally looked at the woman standing behind Mu Feiqi and clearly discerned her face. Her heart instantly jumped. Wasn't this Han Yaotian's older sister, Han Wanling? She was calling this man, Master Mu. Yun-shi turned around to visually assess the man before her eyes. The handsome and harsh lines of his side profile appeared as sharp as a knife, and his expression emanated coldness that warned others against approaching. Chapter 5. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Admitting it herself. Translator. Nyo-i.bo Studio Editor. Nyo-i.bo Studio. As far as Yun-shi knew, there was only one exception of such a man in China. He possessed the most unique identity, held dual roles, was involved in 2 circles, used dual identities, and was born of a noble background. He was the figure who had a god-like existence in China, Mu Feiqi. In Jingdu, there were 3 great noble families and 4 incredibly wealthy families with centuries of history. Mu Feiqi was the youngest clan leader of one of the 3 wealthy families, the Mu clan. Mu Chongli was already a legendary character in Jingdu, but Mu Feiqi was the son who had surpassed his father. At a young age, he had made enough achievements to stand equally alongside his father. In the entirety of Jingdu, Mu Feiqi was the only one allowed to use the title of Master Mu. As soon as the name Master Mu was mentioned, nearly everyone knew who was being referred to. There was only one such major figure in China to be the youngest person to cross both circles. Yun Shi had never expected that she would be trespassing into this man's territory as soon as she was reborn again. She looked over, and, at that moment, her dark, glossy eyes collided with the other pair of eerie, eagle eyes. His lofty aura immediately commanded solemn respect. Her heart rate increased rapidly. Crouching down to pick up a shard of glass from the broken cup, she licked the water inside the groove and a faintly bitter taste permeated the tip of her tongue. She had spent half her previous life inside a laboratory. As soon as she tasted it, she instantly knew what this apparently colorless and tasteless substance was. There wasn't a high level of scopolamine, and it was very difficult to purify in this era. Presumably, Han Wanling spent much effort to get her hands on this. The water was definitely spiked by someone. She turned around to look at Mu Feiqi, then her eyes finally locked on to Han Wanling's guilty face. Han Wanling truly had no fear, since she hadn't even considered her target carefully before spiking the drink. If someone like Mu Feiqi really had fallen into her trap, then he certainly wouldn't have allowed her to live through this. No one enjoyed being tricked or used, nor did anyone enjoy being controlled by others. This was especially the case for a person with a unique identity like Mu Feiqi. They were accustomed to having control, so they wouldn't allow someone else to have the chance to control them. However, Mu Feiqi's sharp gaze fell upon Yun Shi's figure. There was a trace of scrutiny in his eyes. This young girl could actually taste the drug in the water. Han Wanling instantly panicked and the word spike was mentioned. No. Master Mu, I didn't do it. I never even touched your glass of water. She knew that he was a germaphobe who would never touch something that someone he didn't trust had touched before. That's why she merely dropped the drug along the wall of the glass. Yun Shi squinted her eyes slightly and smiled with innocence. I think we are the only 3 people in this house. Han Wanling suddenly whirled around to glare at Yun Shi, anxious to cover up her tracks. Be calm, stop speaking nonsense. What would a puny girl like you even know? Don't even dream of framing me for this. Who did I frame? Yun Shi raised a brow and winked as she sat on the couch with an innocent expression. She crossed her legs and watched Han Wanling continue to dig a deeper grave for herself. With such poor acting skills, she was truly making it more obvious the more she tried to hide. Was she actually treating Mu Feiqi like an idiot? She remembered that Han Wanling's acting skills had been quite good in her last life. When Han Wanling had colluded with her mother, who had climbed her way up as a mistress, to harm Yun Shi, their tricks came one after another. It was enough material to act out a bitter drama. Why did Han Wanling's intelligence fail so badly when Yun Shi had met her earlier on in this new life? There are only 3 of us here. If you aren't framing me, then are you claiming that Master Mu was the one to spike his own drink with a date rape drug? Yun Shi snickered quietly, and her eyes curved into little crescents. She propped her chin up as she leaned against the sofa and reminded Han Wanling suggestively. I didn't say it was a date rape drug. You're going to admit it yourself so soon. You. Han Wanling suddenly realized she had a slip of the tongue, but it was already too late to take the words back. Chapter 6. You are listening at novelfull.audio. She will definitely never be a fool again. Translator. Nyo iwo Studio Editor. Nyo iwo Studio Mufeichi clenched his hands into tight fists as he endured the burning heat inside his body. The tiny effect of the drug wasn't enough to knock him out, but his icy gaze fell upon the young girl before his eyes. This girl was very smart, so she was able to lead Han Wanling into confessing after taking her in a circle. But it was likely because of her young age that she didn't yet know how to conceal her emotions. Did he seem to detect a hint of gloating on this girl's face? Her eyes were lively and unblemished, so crisp, that they sparkled like stars. Yet they were devious like a fox's. He turned around to press the alarm on the wall and the bodyguards outside quickly rushed in. Throw her into the woods to feed the wolves. Mufeichi pointed to Han Wanling as he commanded icily. Yes. Master Mu. No. Master Mu, I didn't do it. I wasn't the one to do it. This wretched girl is framing me. Han Wanling wasn't dumb enough to voluntarily admit that she had tricked Mufeichi. Admitting it was tantamount to death. But Han Wanling also panicked when she heard about the wolf pack in the woods. She was so frightened, that she directly knelt on the ground. I don't even know you and haven't ever held grudges against anybody lately. Why would I want to frame you? Yun Shi looked at the French windows the bodyguards had opened and was deathly afraid the snow leopard would bound inside. She hadn't planned on getting involved but merely stepped in to lead Han Wanling into a confession. That way, Yun Shi would earn a right to speak before Mufeichi and be able to spare Han Wanling's life. If Han Wanling was fed to the wolves now, then there would be Han family drama to play out in the future. Yun Shi must keep control of the situation in this life. For all the pain she suffered, she would return it tenfold to all of them. Within Yun Shi's eyes, Mufeichi noticed cruelty not relative to her young age. He was both surprised and a bit curious. Master Mu, I really wasn't the one to do it. It was her. She's framing me. Just look at the entire Jingdu, what woman doesn't like or admire you? This B*TCH obviously failed to seduce you, that's why she purposely blamed it on me. Han Wanling had used much effort to sneak into this forest, so she had no idea why Yun Shi would have appeared here. She probably wouldn't have raised such a ruckus if she knew. No one would risk their lives to battle against wolves in order to seduce Master Mu. It would be impossible to use the ploy of a thief crying out thief in front of Mufeichi. Yun Shi laughed out loud. Master Mu, cut her flesh with a blunt knife to better avenge the humiliation you suffered today. You want to cut my flesh? You B*TCH. What right do you have to point your fingers in front of Master Mu? Clearly, you're the one who framed me. As Han Wanling said this, she glared bitterly at Yun Shi. Her poisonous look could have almost ripped multiple holes into Yun Shi's body. Yun Shi knew that Mufeichi could understand what her words meant, so she smiled subtly without offering an additional explanation. She finally remembered it now. In her last life, Han Wanling had overdosed Mufeichi and caused him to pass out. When he had regained consciousness, the first thing he had done was to target the Hans. In order to climb into Mufeichi's bed, Han Wanling had certainly gambled everything. She had even wagered all the lives of the members of the Han family. And this man, who had been known as the Master Mu of the Empire, certainly had had means of revenge incomparable to all the ancients and predecessors, so he was known to be absolutely ruthless. He had used the hostile forces within the Han's inner workings to grind away the Han's influence and wealth, bit by bit. Finally, he had cornered them with no escape route. Han Wanling and Xiao Shiming had taken the opportunity to empty the funds for the South District project and colluded to frame Yun Shi for the crime. In order to rectify the Han Corporation's internal financial crisis, she desperately had worked to research new products and even used her own body as a test subject. After having experienced Han Yaotian's betrayal in her previous life, she would definitely never be a fool again in her reborn life. She wouldn't allow them to die too easily. If they had stayed alive, they could better suffer the dirtiest sins and pain of this world. Mu Feiqi swept his hand and his dark eyes flashed with an icy glint. Throw her outside and tell Han Hongban that his daughter offended me. Also, bring your captain's head to see me if you allow another insignificant person in here again. Yes. The bodyguards immediately carried a limp Han Wanling outside. The living room grew quiet once again. Yun Shi glanced at the man and instinctively wanted to bolt. The drug was about to take effect. Although the drug wasn't of very high purity, and the term aphrodisiac was not yet used in this era, date rape drugs could be considered the prototype for aphrodisiacs. Even if he was a man made of iron, he wouldn't be able to overcome the drug once it took effect. She was the only woman here. If she didn't run now, she'd be the one to suffer if she stayed behind. Chapter 7. You are listening at novelfull.audio. What have you done to our boss? Translator. Nyo.bo Studio Editor. Nyo.bo Studio. Just as Yun Shi prepared to run off, the snow leopard's lazy figure slowly sauntered through the French windows. It blocked Yun Shi in a silly and adorable way. All the things that frightened her were appearing now. With her path blocked off, Yun Shi backed up a few steps, and her back collided loudly against a solid chest behind her. Mu Feiqi's eyes fell on her tiny and delicate earlobes. Yun Shi turned around frantically, her bare and youthful face making him feel all the blood in his body begin to boil and burn. The young girl's natural aroma tantalized his senses, and his last bit of reason slowly faded away. Traps were laid ahead with soldiers chasing her from behind. The window on the left opened toward the forest, and there was still a pack of wolves in the trees. Her eyes locked on the direction before bolting toward the right staircase, but who knew the man beside her would be even faster than she was. Just as she moved her legs to run, he directly ran in front of her. Yun Shi was taken by surprise and crashed right into his arms. The youthful and soft little creature was struggling in Mu Feiqi's arms, so his eyes gleamed as an insuppressible fire raged inside his body. When deputies Feng Rui and Qi Yuan received the news, they immediately rushed over. As soon as they stepped into the living room, they saw the scandalous scene of a young girl being harassed and pressed up against the French windows by Master Mu. On the floorboards nearby, the snow leopard stared pointedly as it blocked Yun Shi's path. At that moment, Yun Shi was like a slab of meat on a cutting board. She was a lamb to slaughter. The two men widened their eyes as they watched the situation and truly felt confused. Help! Yun Shi was both shocked and frightened to be pressed against the window and nibbled crazily by Mu Feiqi. She was shocked by this man's crazed and aggressive actions. He basically wanted to take her apart and eat her up. She was frightened by the snow leopard on the ground as it was just as evil as its owner. It actually dared to support such a bully who took advantage of a pubescent, weak, little girl like herself. When Mu Feiqi's aggressive strength fully grounded against her thin and fragile body, she could not retaliate at all. Even if she did, there was still a snow leopard eyeing her carefully. She couldn't run away, no matter what. The two subordinates could either leave or stay as they watched this scandalous scene, so it was very awkward. Yun Shi used great effort to struggle away from his burning lips, so she panted as she shouted at the two subordinates, "Hurry up and get over here. Your Master Mu was drugged by someone." Qi Yuan ended up being the logical one. He noticed that there was something wrong with his Master Mu, so he quickly dragged Feng Rui into the living room. Scram! Mu Feiqi controlled the fire inside his body and braced one hand against the French window. He finally released the hand that was pressing down on Yun Shi. Qi Yuan and Feng Rui instantly stopped in their tracks. Yun Shi instinctively wanted to run as soon as she was released, but her legs turned to jelly again when she saw the snow leopard standing guard on the ground. She looked up at the man so close to her. His consciousness was only half there, yet he was still forcing himself to contain the drug's effect. He completely exuded masculine decisiveness and tenacity. In that one moment, she recalled the brave, Snow Mountain soldiers who had rescued her from the snowy peaks all those years ago. In order to research a drug to combat high altitude sickness, she had brought her assistant all the way to the Tibetan plateau. If the soldiers hadn't come by and rescued them, then she would have probably died on the snowy mountain a long time ago. She was unable to act indifferent before a righteous man like him. Reaching out, she felt for the carotid artery on his neck. After locking on to the acupuncture point, she clenched her hand into a fist and viciously jabbed her fist on the acupuncture point. Qi Yuan quickly caught the passed-out Master Mu and gave a shocked look to the young girl leaning against the window, panting. What did you do to our boss? I've made him temporarily pass out. Carry him over to the bed. It'd be best if you called a doctor here. He has a date rape drug in his system, and if there are no women to relieve him or antidote to cure it, this could easily result in, She snuck a look at Mu Feiqi's lower half that was cloaked inside his pants, her face flushing slightly. She didn't need to finish her sentence for the subordinated to understand what she meant from the look she gave. Chapter 8 You are listening at Novel Full.audio. We are not bandits. Translator. Nyo-i.bo Studio Editor. Nyo-i.bo Studio. Phone Roy instantly panicked. What should we do? The doctor took the day off, so there is only one veterinarian in the entire forest. Qi Yuan directly replied, ask the veterinarian to come over here. You've gone crazy. If the boss finds out you asked a veterinarian to treat him, he will definitely kill you. Our boss's life is more important than my life. Go. Well. You guys don't have to panic. I can treat Master Mu. Yun Shi hid away from the staring snow leopard as she interrupted the two men arguing with a rigid expression. Feng Rui and Qi Yuan glanced at her. You. What kind of joke is that? It was true that she was female, but she wasn't mature at all. Their boss would still never forgive them if he tainted an adolescent girl. They were men. Not gangsters or bandits. How could they put their hands on a young girl? I'm saying that I know a bit of medical theory, so I can treat him as long as you have the medication I need here. However, I have some terms. Once Yun Shi realized that they had misunderstood her, she blushed and swallowed hard as she explained. The two men took a glance at her and obviously didn't quite believe a young girl like her would know any kind of medical theory. But the doctor wasn't here right then, and the forest area was too far away from the city. Feng Rui and Qi Yuan didn't have the guts to allow a young girl to treat Master Mu's ailment. If something were to happen, Uncle Mu would certainly issue military punishments. But if their boss was unable to carry on the future progeny of the Mu family, then Uncle Mu would also certainly have them be buried alongside Master Mu. Qi Yuan considered it repeatedly and turned around to assess the young girl who even dared to fight for her life against a wolf pack. Her eyes were bright, lucid, and untainted by the world. She didn't even have Han Wanling's ulterior motives. She wasn't very old at all but didn't lack confidence. Her youthful and clean face resembled an exquisite doll. When he recalled her vicious and rapid moves when she had dealt with the wolf pack, he didn't dare to underestimate this young girl. What are your terms? After deliberating it for the last time, Qi Yuan finally asked the question. Yun Shi stretched her hand that was wrapped up like a mummy and made a victory sign. She asked with a smile, can I ask for 2 terms? She was asking so carefully and even revealed 2 little incisors when she smiled. This somehow made Qi Yuan think she was slightly cute. Tell me. Send me back home after dawn. Can you take me back to Muyang nearby? I want to go home. Okay. What's the other term? They had originally intended to send her back, anyway. I haven't eaten the entire day, and I'm very hungry. Also, get rid of the snow leopard. I'm afraid that it'll use me to fill its belly before I can even fill my own belly. Qi Yuan began to laugh at this term. Yun Shi followed Qi Yuan to the nearby drugstore and dug out a few bottles of Western medication and clean syringes. In this era, some of the Western drug names differed from what was used in her own era. However, the drug effects were still the same, and some were even more potent. Feng Rui was still worried, so he especially called Master Mu's exclusive doctor. After reporting the drug names and confirming that they were all correct, he finally agreed for Yun Shi to inject the drugs. The veterinarian in the drugstore also rushed over after having received the news. He was a bit shocked to see the young girl standing by the bed. She held the needle and administered the injection with standard and experienced movement and posture. Her youthful face was absolutely unperturbed, and her calm demeanor didn't appear goofy. She was serious and solemn. If he hadn't personally witnessed this exquisite young girl, then he truly couldn't have connected her with the girl who had hurt several wolves in the surveillance video. Yun Shi looked down as she diligently injected the drug into the artery on Mu Feiqi's arm. She finally stood up after everything was done and turned around to look at Qi Yuan standing on the side. He should wake up in 2 hours. Have your Master Mu drink some water later and let him rest properly. Oh, Yun Shi's expression instantly changed as soon as she noticed the snow leopard standing beside the veterinarian. It crouched before climbing onto the bed. You. Didn't I ask you to get this thing outside? She grabbed Yi Quan so he could block in front of her as she curled up her body and backed up on the bed. Chapter 9. You are listening at novelfull.audio. So timid translator. Nyo.bo studio editor. Nyo.bo studio. The snow leopard walked a few steps forward when it heard its name. It poked its head over from behind Qi Yuan's right hand. Yun Shi held on to Qi Yuan like a shield as she slowly and cautiously poked her head out from the left side. She hadn't noticed that the snow leopard had already approached closely from the right side. The snow leopard's loud, panting breathing echoed in her right ear. Yun Shi instantly exhaled sharply, her neck stiffening as she turned around. As soon as she turned around, she was met with an extremely close cat face that was attempting to act cute. She couldn't catch her breath and immediately passed out in fright. She's so timid. The veterinarian looked at the young girl passed out on the bed. Though she had appeared fairly brave when she battled against the wolf pack, a mere snow leopard was enough to frighten her into fainting. She looked quite brave when she battled against the wolf pack. If it were another woman, they would have surely cried out loud and surrendered. News of the young girl battling against the wolf pack had already circulated throughout the entire area. Everyone wanted to see for themselves if this young girl had 3 heads and 6 arms. The drugs took effect, and in less than 2 hours, Mu Feiqi had awakened. He had just opened his eyes and sat up when the snow leopard noticed this and leaped up to jump into his arms. Mu Feiqi patted the snow leopard's head and looked up to see his 2 subordinates and the veterinarian inching closer to him. His sharp gaze fell upon the veterinarian. Dark brows raising slightly, he asked with a hint of lethality, "Did you treat me?" The veterinarian instantly shuddered, his legs turning into jelly as he quickly waved his hand in protest. "Boss, what kind of joke is that? I'm a veterinarian. How would I ever dare to treat you?" Although he had studied simple nursing skills, he was only responsible for the wolf pack and snow leopard. Rashly treating people was overstepping jurisdiction, so Master Mu would certainly have peeled his skin off. He was terrified he would get blamed, so with shaking hands, the veterinarian pointed at the young girl lying on the other side of the bed. "She was the one to treat you." Mu Feiqi turned around to look at the tiny figure curled up asleep next to him. Her soft and sleek, dark hair spilled over the pillow. Her tiny, fan-like, curly eyelashes cast a faint shadow on her face. Under the lights, her fair and flawless face still revealed hints of immaturity. However, that accentuated the exquisiteness and beauty of her pink and tender lips. Her slender neck still bore the red marks from his earlier biting. He faintly recalled laying a hand on her when the drug took effect. But afterward, she seemed to have made him pass out, and then he had no recollection of what had happened next. He was obviously given medication if he was able to wake up in such a short period of time. Feng Rui also stood up. That's right. This girl really is something special. She was able to battle against the wolf pack and could also give injections and treat illness. I called the doctor when she was administering the drug, so I only dared to allow her to administer it to you once the doctor said it was correct. The veterinarian continued to say, when I watched her give the injection, she appeared well practiced and didn't look like a novice at all. Mai Feiqi furrowed his brows, his deep gaze falling upon the young girl at the bedside. A strange look flashed across his eyes. He was really becoming more and more curious about this young girl. Didn't she wake up already? Why did she fall asleep again? Well, the veterinarian looked down at the snow leopard next to him. I think Great White quite likes her, but he frightened her into fainting as soon as he approached her. The snow leopard leaped onto the bed and laid down as it innocently patted with his front paws. It tried to prove that it really was innocent. Mu Feiqi looked up at Qi Yuan. Did you properly investigate how she came into the forest? Qi Yuan nodded. I already checked the surveillance cameras and questioned her as well. She had fallen down from the cliff ahead and is a villager from Muyang nearby. We'll have to send her back home tomorrow morning. Feng Yui glanced at the young girl on the bed. She is somehow all right, even though she fell from such a high place. She sure is lucky. Mu Feiqi noticed Feng Rui's gaze, so he grabbed the thin blanket and completely covered the young girl on the bed from head to toe. Then, he also got up from the bed. Go back and bring a team with you. Begin monitoring the area within 3 kilometers of the cliff where she fell from. Yes. The 3 men exchanged a knowing look. Could Master Mu not want anyone else to take another look at her? At that moment, all 3 of them reacted. Master Mu didn't seem to dislike the girl being so close to him. That was rather rare. Chapter 10. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Little Ungrateful Girl Translator. Nyo.bo Studio Editor. Nyo.bo Studio. It was already dawn when Yun Shi awoke once again. She quickly hurried down the stairs, but she was still standing on the stairs when she saw the man and snow leopard, who had returned from a morning run. She instinctively retreated. Mu Fei glanced at the tiny mummy on the top of the stairs and waved his hand at her. Come down here. His boots strode on the wooden floors, footsteps confident. Compared to his mighty masculinity, the snow leopard beside him appeared especially lazy. It slowly padded forward with its tail up as it kept staring at Yun Shi the entire time. It truly resembled a huge cat when it didn't bare its fangs and claws at her. In the presence of such a pet, Yun Shi didn't dare to move. It won't bite. But if you won't come down, I'll have to ask it to usher you down the stairs. No. I'll come down myself. As opposed to being passive, she might as well take the initiative. Coming downstairs, Yun Shi watched the snow leopard approach her with vigilance. She was so nervous that she was unable to move her feet at all. It likes you a lot, so you don't have to worry about it attacking you. The snow leopard stopped near her feet and lifted a paw to pat the top of her feet as it inclined its head in an attempt to be adorable. When Yun Shi saw that it really had no intention of attacking her, she finally sighed in relief. Qi Yuan brought breakfast over and Yun Shi was a bit perplexed to see the simple, Chinese-style breakfast on the dining table. Steamed buns, soy milk, plain congee, and side dishes, this looked like a commoner family's breakfast. She had assumed that, since Mu Feiqi possessed the prestigious status of Master Mu, he must be especially picky with his food. In her previous life, she had read gossip about him. In addition to his great achievements, there had been even more content about the entertainment media's idolization of him. He was the famed and decisive Master Mu of Jingdu, clan leader of the Mu clan, and also an icon in the fashion world. However, he had a very low-key private life, and the more private he was, the greater effort people used to unearth scandals about him. This man had been enshrined in the altar and was so outstanding that he could only be observed from a distance but never interacted with up close. Qi Yuan will send you home after we finish breakfast. Thank you. Yun Shi nodded. She had been starving the entire day, so her stomach had already adhered to her back. She didn't bother pretending to be polite to Mu Feiqi before directly taking a seat. Mu Feiqi cocked his head as he eyed the tiny and bare face, remarking calmly, "You were the one to save me last night. You don't need to thank me. I never owe anyone favors. We can call it even now." Her plain and not effeminate tone didn't seem like one to be used by a girl her age. Mu Fei was a bit taken back, his dark eyes falling upon her slender fingers. The fingers ripping the steamed bun apart were finely sculpted as she separated even the tiniest bit of affection with extreme totality. This was the first time he had come across a woman who didn't want to have anything to do with him. Although, she was still an immature, little girl. Since she had woken up last night until now, he didn't recall her ever asking who changed her clothes. She didn't even seem to worry about her personal safety as she slept on his bed. He truly didn't know if she was actually oblivious or just not that bright. "What's your name?" Mu Feiqi leaned back against the chair, his long and narrow eyes squinting slightly as they locked onto her face. "Yun Shi." Yun meaning cloud, Shi meaning dawn. The light of dawn within clouds, what a nice name. Yun Shi swallowed the bun in her mouth and stood up after finishing her soy milk. "Thank you for breakfast, but I need to go home now. Can you please ask someone to take me outside?" When Qi Yuan drove the car over, Yun Shi had already changed back into her own tattered set of clothes and opened the car door to directly get inside. Great White watched her get into the car and quickly bounded over. However, Yun Shi had already shut the car door before it could even climb inside. Outside the window, Great White sprawled against the glass and pressed its paws on it with a look of dismay. Although Yun Shi now knew it didn't bite people, she was still a bit afraid. Shrinking her neck back, she asked Qi Yuan to quickly start the car. The engine ignited and Qi Yuan glanced at the person and snow leopard standing reluctantly in the rearview mirror. He remarked coolly, "I hadn't expected Great White to actually like you. It doesn't give attention to anyone except for Master Mu." Yun Shi turned her head away as she watched the man and snow leopard gradually shrink into a small dot. Her expression was calm. After today, they would never cross paths again. It didn't matter to her if they liked her or not. Mu Feiqi remained standing in place as he casually looked away. His thin lips moved slightly. Little, ungrateful girl. She hadn't even said goodbye.